My daughter thought humiliating me in front of her new in-laws would make her look powerful. What she didn't know was that the very people she worshipped were about to expose her darkest secret, right there, in her wedding gown. People say a mother's love has no limits, but let me ask you something. What happens when that love is spat on, trampled, and thrown back in your face? Would you still call it unconditional? Or would you finally admit that even a mother has a breaking point? I'm 68 years old, and I've lived a life full of sacrifice. Some would say that's what motherhood is all about. But I can tell you right now, there's sacrifice, and then there's erasure. That's what I became in my daughter Amanda's eyes, invisible. She erased everything I had done for her, as if the years of double shifts, late-night meals of canned soup, and walking home with blistered feet never existed. When I first walked into that wedding hall, I knew I didn't belong. The chandeliers sparkled, the guests dripped in diamonds, and the air smelled like money. I clutched my thrift store clutch a little tighter and told myself it didn't matter. I was there for my daughter, not for the stares of rich strangers. But deep down, I felt the sting. Let me pause here and ask you, have you ever walked into a room and felt like the whole world was measuring your worth in dollars, not dignity? It burns. And that day, it burned hotter than ever. I've been called many things in my life: widow, maid, server, charity case. None of those labels ever broke me. But when my own daughter, the baby I held against my chest, the little girl who once said I was her hero, introduced me to her fiancé's parents as a broke loser, well, that nearly did. But here's the thing about life, it has a funny way of flipping the script. My humiliation that day didn't end with my tears. No, something far more shocking happened. Something that made every guest in that room gasp out loud. If you think my story ends with shame, think again. Because what my daughter didn't realize was that her secrets were about to surface in the ugliest way possible. And the same people she tried so hard to impress, the wealthy in-laws she flaunted me in front of, would be the ones to destroy her carefully polished image. Stay with me, because if you've ever been underestimated, mocked, or betrayed by the very people you gave your life for, you'll want to hear exactly how this story turned on its head. I promise you, what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, pride, and justice. When people see me now, they assume I've always been alone. But that's not true. Once upon a time, I had love, the kind of love that makes the world feel less cruel. His name was James Parker, my husband, my best friend, the father of my only child. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and for me, that was enough. James was the kind of man who could fix a leaky faucet with one hand and make me laugh until my stomach hurt with the other. He worked long hours at the local factory, while I picked up shifts at a small diner in town. We weren't rich, but we were a family. Amanda was just 5 years old when everything changed. It was a cold January morning when James kissed my forehead before leaving for work. I can still remember the way his coat smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint gum. He promised to be home by dinner. Only, he never came back. The knock on the door that night still echoes in my mind. A man in a dark jacket, holding his hat in his hands, eyes lowered to the ground. "Mrs. Parker," he said softly, "there's been an accident at the plant." I collapsed before he could finish. My world ended that night. James was gone, just like that. One slip, one faulty machine, and I was left a widow with a little girl staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. Have you ever looked into the eyes of your child and wondered how on earth you're supposed to carry both of your lives on your shoulders? That's what widowhood felt like for me. From that moment, I made a promise: Amanda would never go hungry, never go without clothes, never feel the sting of poverty if I could help it. I worked mornings as a nursing assistant at a nearby clinic and nights serving coffee and burgers at Mel's Diner. My feet blistered, my back ached, but I never complained. Because when you're a mother, there's no room for self-pity. Still, no matter how hard I worked, the money was never enough. Rent, food, school supplies, it all stacked up. Sometimes I went without meals just so Amanda could eat a full dinner. Other times I pretended I wasn't hungry when the truth was, I couldn't afford more than one plate. But here's the painful part. Sacrifice doesn't always look like love to a child. Amanda didn't see the nights I cried into a pillow after scrubbing diner floors. She didn't know I gave up new shoes so she could have her dance recital costume. All she saw was what we didn't have. Her friends wore designer clothes, she wore hand-me-downs from the church donation box. Their birthday parties were at bowling alleys and skating rinks, hers were at home with a homemade cake. I thought my love would be enough to balance the scales. But slowly, I could see the resentment growing in her eyes. By the time she turned 12, she stopped inviting friends over. By 16, she'd roll her eyes when I hugged her outside school. And by 18, she couldn't wait to leave for college. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in those early years, all I had was the memory of James and the weight of Amanda's future pressing on my shoulders. People in town whispered things like, "Poor Eleanor, working herself into the grave," or "That girl will either appreciate her mother one day, or despise her." I didn't want to believe the second part could ever be true. I thought love and sacrifice would be enough. But if you've ever raised a child in a world obsessed with wealth and appearances, you know how fragile gratitude can be. And you also know, sometimes the ones you give the most to are the very ones who hurt you the deepest. And Amanda, she was only getting started. Some people say hard work builds character, but I'll tell you something they don't say out loud: hard work also breaks your body. For years, I lived on black coffee and aspirin, because that was the only way I could get through back-to-back shifts. In the mornings, I put on my pale blue scrubs and headed to the clinic. I worked as a nursing assistant, which is just a fancy way of saying I did all the dirty jobs no one else wanted. I cleaned bedpans, changed sheets, bathed patients who couldn't move on their own. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes, and by the time my shift ended, my hands were raw from scrubbing. But I didn't go home to rest. No, I swapped scrubs for a wrinkled uniform at Mel's Diner, tied an apron around my waist, and smiled through another 8 hours on my feet. I carried plates of greasy burgers, refilled endless cups of coffee, and pretended my feet weren't screaming with every step. Some nights I came home so tired I fell asleep in my clothes, only to wake up a few hours later and do it all again. Why? Because Amanda needed shoes. Amanda needed books. Amanda needed everything I couldn't give her unless I worked myself to the bone. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so exhausted that you cry in the bathroom just so your child won't hear you? That was me. Crying into a towel at 2 in the morning, then getting up and putting on a brave face like nothing was wrong. But Amanda never saw those tears. She only saw what other kids had that she didn't. When she was 10, she begged for brand-name sneakers. I scraped together enough tips to buy them, but when she saw the box, her smile faded. "These aren't the newest ones," she muttered. That moment cut me deeper than any knife. Still, I pushed on. I told myself she'd understand one day. That one day, she'd see the sacrifices behind every meal, every school trip, every roof over her head. There were little moments, though, that kept me going. Like the time she came home with a drawing from school. It was a picture of me, wearing an apron and holding a tray, and she wrote underneath, "My mom is the hardest worker in the world." I taped that picture to the fridge and stared at it every night before bed. But kids grow up. And with each passing year, Amanda grew more aware of what we lacked. She'd complain about the size of our house, about the hand-me-down furniture, about how the other girls had cars by the time they turned 16. I wanted to give her the world, but the world I had to offer wasn't good enough for her. There were days when she refused to eat dinner with me, claiming she wasn't hungry, only to sneak out later with friends who could afford fancy restaurants. Other nights she slammed doors, shouting that she was tired of being the poor girl. Those words nearly broke me, because I knew they weren't lies from a child, they were truths she believed. Truths that grew stronger the older she got. By the time Amanda turned 17, she hardly looked me in the eye anymore. She started dating boys from wealthier families, spending weekends at their homes, coming back with stories about houses that had pools and kitchens bigger than our whole apartment. I tried to keep her grounded. I'd sit her down at the kitchen table, pour her a cup of hot cocoa, and say, "Amanda, money doesn't measure your worth. Hard work, kindness, honesty, that's what counts." But she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "That's what poor people say, Mom." Do you know what it feels like to hear that from the one person you sacrificed everything for? It's like being erased. Like all those sleepless nights and double shifts meant nothing. Still, I kept working. I told myself college would change her. If I could just get her into a good school, she'd understand. Maybe she'd even thank me. So I worked longer hours. Picked up extra shifts. Skipped doctor's appointments I couldn't afford. My body screamed at me, but I kept pushing. Because every dollar I saved was a step closer to her future. And when that acceptance letter finally came in the mail, I cried tears of joy. Amanda had been accepted into a top college. I thought it was the moment she'd finally see me, not as a loser, not as a burden, but as the mother who gave her everything. But if there's one thing I learned, it's this: children don't always see what you've done until it's too late. And Amanda? She didn't see me at all. That letter wasn't the beginning of her gratitude. It was the beginning of her distance. College was supposed to be the fresh start Amanda needed, the chance to see how hard I had worked to get her there. I thought she'd call me every week with gratitude in her voice, maybe even tell her new friends about her hard-working mom back in Ohio. Instead, the calls grew fewer, and the tone colder. At first, I brushed it off. Kids get busy, I told myself. She's studying, making friends, learning about the world. But the truth seeped in with every short phone call, every text that felt like an obligation instead of love. Amanda wasn't proud of me. She was embarrassed by me. I'll never forget the first time she introduced me to one of her new college friends. We had gone out for lunch when I visited campus, and Amanda's friend Emily stopped by the table. Emily smiled politely at me, but before I could even open my mouth, Amanda quickly said, "This is my mom. She's just a nursing aide back home." Just. That word stung more than anything. Just a nursing aide. As if the decades I spent on my feet meant nothing. I forced a smile, but inside I felt myself shrinking. That's when I realized something had changed. Amanda didn't just want a better life, she wanted to distance herself from the life she came from. From me. Every time she came home for holidays, she seemed different. She started criticizing our little apartment, the peeling paint on the walls, the second-hand furniture, even the food I put on the table. "Mom, no one eats casseroles anymore," she said one Thanksgiving, pushing her plate away. I wanted to shout at her, to remind her that those casseroles had kept her fed through the darkest years of our lives. But I stayed quiet. Because that's what mothers do. We swallow the pain and hope the child we raised comes back to us one day. But Amanda didn't come back. Not really. She started spending less and less time at home, even during breaks. When she did visit, she kept her phone glued to her hand, texting friends from wealthier families. The first time she brought Michael Turner's name into conversation, her entire face lit up. He was from New York, the son of a wealthy businessman. Amanda spoke about him with pride, not because he loved her, but because of what he had. His family owned multiple properties, drove luxury cars, vacationed in Europe. "Mom," she said one night, leaning against the kitchen counter, "you have no idea how different life feels when you're not worrying about bills all the time." Her words cut deep. I wanted to remind her who had carried those bills for 18 years. Who had bled and sacrificed so she could dream beyond them. But again, I kept my mouth shut. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt your own child slip away from you, inch by inch, while you stand powerless to stop it?" That's what it felt like. A slow fade, a quiet erasure. The seeds of resentment were growing fast. And the worst part? Amanda wasn't just ashamed of our poverty, she was ashamed of me. One evening, while helping her pack to return to school, I found a torn-up photo in her trash. It was a picture of me and her, back when she was little. My arms were around her, my diner uniform still on, both of us smiling at the camera. She had ripped it right down the middle. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the torn photo in my hands, wondering where I had gone wrong. I thought love was enough. I thought sacrifice was enough. But to Amanda, it would never be enough. And soon, her shame wouldn't just live in the shadows of our home, it would spill out into the world, in front of everyone. The older Amanda got, the less of her I seemed to know. It was as though the little girl who once clung to my hand had turned into a stranger overnight. By her second year of college, phone calls had become short and sharp. I'd ask about her classes, her friends, her health, she'd respond with one-word answers. Fine. Good. Busy. Then she'd find an excuse to hang up. I told myself she was just overwhelmed with school. But deep down, I knew the truth, my daughter didn't want to talk to me anymore. When she came home for Thanksgiving that year, the distance was even sharper. She spent most of her time in her room, scrolling on her phone. When she did come out, she acted like a guest in her own home. At dinner, I tried to bridge the gap. "Amanda, do you remember how your father used to sneak extra marshmallows into the sweet potatoes?" I laughed softly, hoping she'd join me in the memory. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "Mom, can we not talk about being poor for once? It's depressing." Poor. That word landed like a punch. I wasn't telling her we were poor. I was reminding her of her father, the man who had loved her more than life itself. But to Amanda, everything about our past was something to be ashamed of. That night, I stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes with tears streaming down my face, while she shut her bedroom door and FaceTimed with friends who lived in big houses and drove shiny new cars. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own home? That's what I was, unseen, unheard, unwanted. When Christmas came, she didn't even bother to hide her disdain. She wrinkled her nose at the decorations I pulled from storage. Mom, these look ancient. Do you know how embarrassing this is if I post pictures? I wanted to scream at her. To tell her those ancient ornaments were the same ones she had begged to hang as a child. But I bit my tongue. Because mothers always hope, foolishly, that silence will keep the peace. The final blow came one evening when we argued over her summer plans. I hoped she'd spend the break at home, maybe take a part-time job to save some money. Instead, she announced she'd be staying with Michael's family in New York. Michael's parents said I could stay with them for the summer. They actually have room for me, unlike this place, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. I froze. Unlike this place. The apartment I had broken my back to pay rent for, the home I had kept warm through brutal winters and cool during sweltering summers, it was nothing more than an embarrassment to her. I wanted to ask her if she remembered the nights I skipped meals so she could have seconds. Or the times I walked miles to work because I couldn't afford gas, just to keep a roof over her head. But what would be the point? She didn't want to hear it. The distance wasn't just measured in miles anymore. It was measured in disdain, in shame, in the way she refused to look me in the eye. That summer, she left without even a hug goodbye. She rolled her suitcase out the door, kissed me on the cheek out of habit, and disappeared into Michael's world, a world where I didn't exist. Standing alone in that quiet apartment, I realized something painful. My daughter wasn't just drifting away from me. She was running. And the further she ran, the more she made sure everyone knew she wasn't like me. But what she didn't realize was that you can run from your mother's love, but you can't run from the truth. And sooner or later, the truth always catches up. When Amanda first mentioned Michael Turner, her voice had a new edge I hadn't heard before, sharp with excitement, smooth with pride. It wasn't the kind of voice you use when you're in love. It was the kind you use when you've won a prize. Mom, you don't understand, she said one evening over the phone. Michael's family is different. They're successful. His dad owns several businesses in New York, and his mom runs a charity. They're respected, admired. This is the kind of family I've always dreamed of being part of. I stayed quiet, though my heart sank. Notice what she didn't say. She didn't say Michael was kind. She didn't say he made her laugh. She didn't say he loved her. All she cared about was his family's name, their wealth, their reputation. When I finally met Michael, I wanted to dislike him. I wanted him to be arrogant, shallow, entitled, because that would have explained Amanda's obsession with him. But the truth? He was polite. Charming even. He shook my hand firmly, called me Mrs. Parker, and told me he was happy to meet me. But even in that moment, I could feel Amanda watching me like a hawk, her eyes darting to my thrift store shoes, my worn purse, my hair that I hadn't had the time or money to dye in months. She was embarrassed of me. I could feel it in the way she tugged at his sleeve, urging him to leave before the conversation went too deep. That night, after they left, I sat in the silence of my apartment and asked myself a painful question. Was I losing my daughter to this boy, or to the world he represented? The answer came slowly, but it was clear. Amanda wasn't falling in love with Michael. She was falling in love with wealth. As the months went by, every conversation with her revolved around the Turners. Their mansion upstate. Their trips to Europe. The galas they attended. The charities they donated to. Amanda would describe their lifestyle with stars in her eyes, as though she was auditioning for the role of perfect daughter-in-law. One afternoon, she called me with what sounded like good news. Michael's parents invited me to stay with them for the summer again. Isn't that wonderful? I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to believe this was normal. But the way she said it, it was less about spending time with her boyfriend and more about securing her place in their world. When she came back home for a short visit, she brought a suitcase full of expensive clothes I knew she hadn't paid for. Designer handbags, shoes that cost more than my rent, jewelry that sparkled under the kitchen light. "Amanda, where did you get all this?" I asked carefully. She smirked. "Michael's family treats me like their own. They know I'm going to be part of them soon. They don't mind helping me look the part." Helping her look the part. The words made my stomach twist. My daughter wasn't just living in their world, she was being molded into someone who despised where she came from. I'll never forget what she said next. She looked around our apartment, at the peeling wallpaper, the old recliner that had belonged to her father, the faded curtains I'd sewn myself. Then she sighed. "Mom, when Michael's parents come for the engagement dinner, please don't embarrass me. Just try to act like you belong." Embarrass her. Me. The woman who had worked herself to the bone to give her the chance to even meet people like Michael. I wanted to scream, to throw her words back in her face. But I didn't. Because in my heart, I still held on to the hope that one day, she'd remember who stood by her side when she had nothing. Have you ever prayed that the child you raised would see you for who you are, not what you don't have? That was my prayer every night. But prayers don't always come true. Because the closer Amanda got to Michael, the further she pushed me away. And what I didn't know then was that her shame would not stop at quiet sighs or private arguments. One day soon, she'd take that shame and put it on full display, in front of strangers, in front of Michael's family, in front of the world. And when she did, the fallout would be so explosive that not even she could escape it. The first time Amanda truly scared me wasn't when she stayed out too late as a teenager or when she started dating boys I didn't know. No, the first time she frightened me was when she looked at me with cold, hard eyes and said, "Mom, don't embarrass me." It was a week before her engagement dinner with Michael's family. She had come home for a visit, her hair perfectly styled, nails freshly done, her entire look polished in a way that didn't belong to the girl I raised. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping bottled water like she was too good for tap, and gave me the kind of lecture a daughter should never give her mother. "Mom, listen," she began, her voice flat, rehearsed. "Michael's parents are different. They're not like us. They have standards. So when you meet them, please don't talk too much. Don't go on about your job, or about Dad, or about, well, anything that makes us sound poor." I stared at her, stunned. "Amanda, are you ashamed of me?" She set the bottle down, avoiding my eyes. "It's not about being ashamed. It's about fitting in. You don't understand how people like them think. They expect a certain level of class." Her words cut deeper than any insult I'd ever heard. Class. As if scrubbing floors and caring for the sick made me classless. As if the sacrifices I made were beneath her. I wanted to remind her of the nights I held her when she cried over losing her father. The mornings I braided her hair before school, even when my hands were swollen from cleaning. The countless times I gave up what little I had so she could have more. But instead, I asked quietly, "And what if I can't meet their standards, Amanda? What then?" She finally looked at me, and the expression on her face froze my heart. "Then stay out of the way." Stay out of the way. Those 4 words told me everything I needed to know. My daughter no longer saw me as a mother. She saw me as an obstacle, something to be managed, controlled, silenced. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. I thought about James, how proud he would have been of Amanda's accomplishments. And I thought about how ashamed he would have been of the way she now spoke to me. Have you ever felt your child's love turn into something colder than a stranger's indifference? That's what it was like. She wasn't just distancing herself, she was cutting me out, piece by piece. The next morning, as she packed her bags to head back to Michael's world, she paused at the door and gave me one final reminder. Please, Mom. Just, don't say anything that could ruin this for me. I've worked too hard. Her words echoed long after she left. I stood there in the silence of our apartment, torn between 2 truths, the pride of a mother who wanted her child to succeed, and the pain of a woman who realized she was no longer welcome in her daughter's life. I promised myself I would stay quiet at the engagement dinner. I would swallow my pride, smile politely, and keep my stories of struggle locked away. For Amanda. For her happiness. But what I didn't know was that silence wouldn't save me. No matter how small I tried to make myself, Amanda would find a way to use me as her stepping stone. And when the spotlight was brightest, on her wedding day, she wouldn't just push me aside. She would crush me in front of everyone. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through the slot of my apartment door. I almost mistook it for junk mail at first, but the thick cream paper and the gold embossed lettering told me otherwise. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was Amanda's wedding invitation. The moment I saw her name written in elegant script, Amanda Parker to Michael Turner, a strange mix of pride and dread washed over me. Pride, because no matter how far apart we had drifted, she was still my daughter, and this was still her big day. Dread, because I knew the kind of world she was marrying into, and I knew exactly how little space there was for someone like me in it. I opened the card carefully, running my fingers over the words. The wedding would take place at a grand hotel ballroom in New York City. I had never stepped foot inside such a place. My entire life had been lived in small apartments, community halls, and church basements. This invitation wasn't just a ticket to a wedding, it was a summons to a world where I would never belong. Still, I pressed the card to my chest and whispered a prayer. Lord, please let me hold my head high that day. I decided then that I would do everything in my power not to embarrass Amanda. If she wanted me quiet, I would be quiet. If she wanted me invisible, I would be invisible. But I would still be there. Because no matter what she thought of me, I was still her mother. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations of my own. I couldn't afford a fancy gown, but I visited the thrift shop downtown and searched through racks until I found a dress that felt respectable. It was navy blue, modest but elegant, with a lace collar and a hem that fell just below my knees. I stood in front of the cracked fitting room mirror and told myself it would do. To go with it, I found a pair of low-heeled shoes, worn, but still sturdy, and a small clutch purse just big enough to hold tissues, lipstick, and the invitation itself. I had saved $50 from tips at the diner, and I used every penny. When I showed the outfit to a neighbor, Mrs. Green from down the hall, she smiled warmly. "You look lovely, Eleanor. Amanda will be proud." I forced a smile, but in my heart, I doubted it. Amanda hadn't looked at me with pride in years. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I laid the dress out carefully on the chair by my bed, polished the shoes until they shone as best they could, and clutched the invitation in my hands like it was both a ticket and a warning. I thought about James. If only he could have been there. He would have straightened my shoulders, brushed the worry from my face, and reminded me that no matter what the world thought, we were enough. Without him, all I had was the ache of his absence and the fear of what tomorrow would bring. On the morning of the wedding, I took extra care with my hair, pinning it neatly the way I used to when Amanda was little. I dabbed on a bit of powder to hide the lines on my face, slipped into the dress, and looked at myself in the mirror. For a brief moment, I almost felt beautiful. But beauty wasn't what Amanda wanted from me. She wanted silence. She wanted smallness. She wanted me to fit into the corner of her new life without drawing attention. As I grabbed my purse and walked out the door, I whispered to myself, "Just get through the day, Eleanor. Smile, stay quiet, and go home." Little did I know, no matter how quiet I tried to be, I couldn't stop what was about to happen. Because the moment Amanda saw me in that ballroom, she wouldn't just push me aside. She would take the knife she'd been sharpening for years, and plunge it straight into my dignity in front of the entire world. The moment I stepped out of the cab and onto the steps of the hotel, I knew I was walking into another world. The building towered above me, glass and marble gleaming in the sunlight. Dalits in pressed uniforms opened car doors for guests who arrived in sleek black cars and limousines. Women in gowns that shimmered like jewels floated past me, men in tailored suits adjusted cufflinks that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And then there was me, clutching my thrift store purse, smoothing down the navy blue dress I had spent weeks choosing, praying no one would notice how worn my shoes really were. Inside, the ballroom sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, spilling golden light across tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters carried trays of champagne glasses that clinked with every step. The air smelled of roses and money, an intoxicating mix that made me feel both dizzy and small. I took a deep breath and told myself to stand tall. "You belong here," I whispered, though every glance from the glittering guests said otherwise. Some looked at me politely, others looked right through me, as if I were invisible. I searched the room for Amanda, hoping to catch her eye, to see even the smallest glimmer of warmth. After all, I was still her mother, and this was still her wedding day. But when she finally appeared, dressed in a gown that sparkled like it had been stitched with stars, her smile wasn't for me. It was for them, for Michael, for his family, for the hundreds of guests watching her every move. When she did glance my way, her eyes darted quickly over my outfit, her lips tightening just slightly before she looked away. No smile. No acknowledgement. Just a fleeting look that said, "Don't you dare ruin this for me." I felt my stomach drop, but I forced myself to keep going. I found my seat, at the very back of the room, near the kitchen doors where waiters bustled in and out. I wasn't surprised. Amanda had always been careful about where to place me, making sure I wouldn't draw attention. Sitting there, I tried to focus on the music, on the beauty of the room, on anything that would keep me from crying. I remembered when Amanda was a little girl, playing dress-up in my old heels, spinning around the living room, telling me she'd be a princess one day. I never imagined that in her fairy tale, I'd be cast as the embarrassment. As the ceremony began, I watched her walk down the aisle on Michael's arm, radiant and glowing. For a moment, despite everything, I felt proud. That was my daughter. That was the baby I held in my arms, the little girl I raised through hardship, the woman I had sacrificed everything for. But pride has a way of turning bitter when it's mixed with humiliation. Because I could sense it. I could feel it in the way Amanda avoided me, in the way her friends glanced back and whispered. Something was coming. Something sharp, something cruel. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and felt the weight of a storm building, knowing it was about to break over your head? That's how it felt. I told myself to stay calm. To smile. To remember the promise I made, to be quiet, to be invisible, to give Amanda the perfect day she wanted. But no amount of silence could save me from what she was about to do. Because before the night was over, Amanda would make sure the entire room knew exactly what she thought of me. And she wouldn't whisper it behind closed doors. She would carve it into my dignity in front of everyone. The reception was already in full swing when it happened. The music had shifted from classical strings to upbeat jazz, the champagne flowed freely, and the ballroom buzzed with laughter and conversation. From my seat near the back, I tried to disappear into the wallpaper, watching my daughter float from guest to guest like she had been born into this world. I told myself I'd stay quiet, eat my slice of chicken breast politely, and slip out early before anyone noticed me. But fate doesn't let you hide when humiliation is on its way. Amanda, darling, a voice boomed from the crowd. It was Evelyn Turner, Michael's mother, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier. Introduce us properly to your family. We've been dying to meet them. The room hushed just enough for the words to carry. My stomach tightened. I knew this moment would come, but I prayed Amanda would find some kindness in her heart, some trace of the little girl who once clung to me at night when thunderstorms rattled the windows. Amanda turned, her smile bright as ever, and walked me forward. My feet felt like lead as I followed her to the front of the room. Dozens of eyes turned to us. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the music had stopped. This, Amanda said, her voice light and cheerful, is my mother. She paused, just long enough to let the silence grow heavy. And then she added with a laugh that sliced straight through me, she's just a broke loser who could barely afford to be here tonight. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said something else, something softer, something less cruel. But then the gasps rippled through the crowd, and the laughter, quiet, uncomfortable laughter, followed. I froze. My throat closed up, my vision blurred. Heat rushed to my face as if every eye in that ballroom was a spotlight burning into me. My own daughter had reduced me to a punchline, a cheap joke to make herself look superior in front of her new family. Evelyn Turner arched an eyebrow. Her husband, Richard, exchanged a glance with her that I couldn't read. Guests covered their mouths, some smirking, others whispering. My knees shook so badly I thought I might collapse right there on the polished marble floor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all about the nights I worked until dawn, about the meals I skipped so Amanda could eat, about the way I carried her through life when I had nothing left for myself. I wanted to tear down the illusion she had built at my expense. But no words came. My lips trembled, my voice stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. All I could do was stand there, exposed, stripped of dignity by the very child I had sacrificed everything for. Have you ever been humiliated so deeply that your body feels numb, like you've stepped outside yourself just to survive the moment? That's what it felt like. Watching myself from a distance, frozen in place, while Amanda basked in the laughter she had created. Michael, her fiancé, stood beside her, his smile faltering. He looked at me, then at Amanda, confusion flickering in his eyes. For the first time that night, I saw doubt crack through his polished expression. I lowered my gaze, clutching my purse so tightly the clasp dug into my hand. If James had been alive, he would have stormed out, dragging me with him, protecting me from this humiliation. But James wasn't there. It was just me, small, alone, and broken in front of strangers who would forget me by morning. Amanda leaned in slightly, her voice a whisper only I could hear. See? I told you not to embarrass me. Just smile and stay quiet. I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting back tears. Smile and stay quiet. That's all she wanted from me. But what Amanda didn't realize was that her cruelty had set something in motion, something far bigger than her shallow words. Because the Turners, the people she was desperate to impress, weren't laughing with her. They were looking at her with a smirk that held secrets. Secrets that would soon turn her entire world upside down. The silence after Amanda's words was louder than any applause. My cheeks still burned from humiliation, my ears buzzing as if the whole world had tilted against me. But then I noticed something strange. Richard and Evelyn Turner weren't laughing. Instead, they exchanged a slow, knowing smirk. It wasn't the polite smile of wealthy people indulging a shallow comment. No, it was the kind of smile that hides a blade. Evelyn leaned closer to her husband, whispered something, and then straightened with a sparkle in her eyes that wasn't joy, it was satisfaction. Amanda Parker, Richard said, his deep voice slicing through the murmurs in the ballroom, you might want to be careful with your words. The room stilled. Amanda's smile faltered for the first time that night. I don't understand. What do you mean? Evelyn folded her hands delicately in front of her, her diamonds catching the chandelier's glow. You've spent months painting a picture of yourself as the perfect bride, the perfect match for our son. But unfortunately, darling, pictures crack when the truth comes out. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michael turned sharply toward his parents, confusion etched across his face. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Richard reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. He didn't even look at me, his eyes were fixed on Amanda, whose face was draining of color. These, Richard said calmly, opening the folder, are financial records. Records that show how you've been siphoning money from Michael's accounts for months. Tens of thousands of dollars. Spent on designer clothes, jewelry, vacations with friends, all while pretending you could afford the life you were flaunting. The room exploded with whispers. Guests leaned toward each other, mouths covered in shock. Amanda's hand shot up, trembling. No. That's not true. I wouldn't. Evelyn cut her off with a laugh, cold and sharp. Oh, darling, don't play innocent now. We gave you every chance to come clean. Did you think our lawyers wouldn't notice the missing funds? Or that Michael wouldn't eventually ask where the money was going? Amanda's eyes darted around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to defend her. But all she found were stares. Michael stepped back, his face pale. Amanda, is this true? She shook her head frantically, her voice cracking. No, Michael, I swear, I was just borrowing. Borrowing? Richard's tone was icy. From accounts that weren't yours to touch? That's not borrowing, Amanda. That's theft. My breath caught. Theft. The word rang in my ears. I looked at my daughter, my only child, standing there in her glittering gown, suddenly small, cornered, exposed. I wanted to rush forward, to shield her, to hold her the way I did when she was little and afraid. But another part of me, the part still bleeding from her cruel words, stayed rooted to the spot. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave, handful by handful, until there's nothing left you can do but witness the collapse? That was me in that ballroom. Amanda turned to me then, her eyes wild. Mom. Tell them I'm not a thief. Tell them I wouldn't do this. I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I say? I didn't know this version of her anymore. The girl who once hugged me tight and called me her hero had turned into someone I couldn't recognize. Richard's voice boomed again. We've already contacted the authorities. It's only a matter of time before they arrive. And then Evelyn, with her perfect posture and polished smile, delivered the final blow. Amanda Parker, consider this your introduction, not as a bride, not as a daughter-in-law, but as a criminal. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, phones snapping pictures. Michael dropped his champagne glass. It shattered across the marble floor, the sound ringing like a gavel. Amanda collapsed into a chair, her hands clutching her gown, her face pale with panic. For the first time all evening, she looked less like a princess and more like a child caught in a lie too big to escape. And me? I stood frozen, humiliated still, but now watching the shame shift onto her. The daughter who had tried to erase me had just been erased herself, by the very people she worshipped. But this wasn't the end. No. Because the police hadn't arrived yet. And when they did, Amanda's downfall would be complete. The ballroom doors burst open before Amanda could find another excuse. 2 uniformed officers walked in, their heavy boots echoing across the polished floor. The music stopped mid-note, waiters froze in place, and the guests' whispers turned into a stunned silence. Are you Amanda Parker? One of the officers called out, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Amanda stood, trembling, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her bouquet. I don't understand, she stammered, her voice barely audible. The officer didn't flinch. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. You're under investigation for fraud and theft. You'll need to come with us. Gasps erupted all around me. Some guests pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. Others turned their faces away, pretending not to watch even as their curiosity burned in their eyes. No. Amanda cried, her voice cracking. This is a mistake. Michael, please, tell them this is a mistake. But Michael only stood there, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He didn't move toward her. He didn't lift a finger. The man she thought would shield her had already turned his back. When the officer reached for her wrist, Amanda shrieked. Mom. Do something. Please, help me. The sound of those words nearly broke me. For a split second, I saw the little girl she used to be, reaching for my hand after a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare I could chase away. This was the consequence of choices she had made, choices I couldn't undo. The cold click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. Amanda collapsed into sobs, her mascara streaking down her face, her wedding gown bunching awkwardly as the officers guided her forward. Chaos erupted. Guests whispered louder, some shouting questions, others shaking their heads in disgust. The flash of cameras lit up the room like lightning. The perfect wedding Amanda had built, piece by piece, crumbled in a matter of seconds. And me? I stood perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't move. For once in my life, I wasn't the one on my knees, humiliated before the world. Amanda was. And as she was led out through those grand double doors, I realized something chilling. My silence had protected me more than my words ever could. The ballroom was still buzzing after the officers dragged Amanda away. Guests murmured in disbelief, some still clutching champagne glasses as if holding on to them might anchor them in the chaos. I thought maybe things would quiet down, that people would slip out and pretend they hadn't just witnessed a bride in handcuffs. But then Michael stepped forward. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his hands trembling just slightly at his sides. The room fell into silence again, waiting for him to speak. "I can't do this," he said finally, his voice heavy but clear. "This marriage, it's over." His words cut sharper than any blade. The same crowd that had laughed at Amanda's cruel joke about me now gasped again, this time in disbelief. Some even clapped softly, as though justice had been served. Amanda, still in the grip of the officers, let out a wail that echoed against the marble walls. "Michael, please. Don't do this. I love you." But Michael didn't even look at her. His eyes swept the room, then landed briefly on me. For a moment, I thought I saw pity there, maybe even respect. Then he turned away. The engagement ring slipped from Amanda's trembling hand and clattered onto the floor, a hollow sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. I stood there, still silent, still steady, as my daughter's perfect fairy tale collapsed into dust. And for the first time in years, the humiliation wasn't mine to carry. It was hers. When the chaos finally settled, I expected to feel broken. I thought the weight of Amanda's cruelty, the stares, and the whispers would crush me completely. But as the ballroom emptied, something unexpected happened. People began to approach me. Strangers, guests who had witnessed it all, touched my arm gently and whispered, "I'm so sorry for what you went through." Some even said, "You raised her on your own? You're stronger than most of us could ever be." Even Richard and Evelyn Turner came over, their sharpness softened. Evelyn looked me in the eye and said, "Mrs. Parker, whatever your daughter chose to do, it doesn't define you. You carried her here. And for that, we respect you." Respect. A word I hadn't felt in years. Not from Amanda, not from anyone. And yet here it was, in the ashes of her downfall. I realized then that my silence had been more powerful than any outburst could have been. By standing tall, I hadn't just survived the humiliation, I had outlived it. For the first time in years, I walked out of that building not with shame on my shoulders, but with dignity in my heart. They called me a broke loser. They laughed at my worn shoes, my thrift store dress, my silence. But when the night ended, I was the one who walked out with my dignity intact. I learned something that day: money can buy gowns, rings, even respect in the short term, but it cannot buy character. It cannot buy truth. So if you're listening to me now, remember this: never underestimate a mother's strength, and never mistake poverty for weakness. Because sometimes, the ones you try to erase are the very ones who will outlast you.